Hello, this is Jillian from Design Student Savvy, and today we're going to continue learning how to draw a two-dimensional floor plan in SketchUp. I have the basic shell of a house here, my own house, that I drew from the image available on the assessor's website for my property, and I printed this out to scale, and then I used that print as the basic starting point for sketching in the interior walls with the dimensions. And now that I have all of the dimensions written down for all of the walls and the window and door openings, I'm going to get started by laying in the walls. So you can see I have my plan here, the basic outline of the house, and it's still in perspective view. So if I hold down the roller ball on my mouse, I get the orbit tool and I can rotate around it, look at it from the top and the bottom. But we're drawing an orthographic drawing, and so I want to look at this from the top down in parallel projection mode. So I am going to go to Camera, Standard Views, Top. So I'm looking straight down at the floor plan, and then I'm going to turn on parallel projection by going to Camera, Parallel Projection. And now I'm looking straight down at the floor plan in an orthographic view, which means that I can measure it and that all lines are at right angles to one another. So the next thing I want to do is switch to a more user-friendly drawing style, at least for me. So I'm going to go to Window, Styles, and I'm just going to select the shaded drawing style. There it is. And you can see it's just nice and white. It's easy to read. The lines are very simple. You don't have those endpoints accentuated. And so this is how I like to work most of the time when I'm designing in SketchUp. Okay, so before we go ahead and get started drawing in the interior walls, I wanted to show you the measurements that I took actually in the house. So I remember I had printed out this floor plan to scale and used it as my starting point, and then I sketched in all of the interior walls and made notes of all the dimensions. And usually I measure from interior face to interior face. You can see that here for the living room, 27 feet 2 3/4. And then I identify all the windows and door openings. I dimension from the nearest wall to the opening. And then, so you can see, I number the windows and doors, usually just the windows, and I write down that interior width, and then I also write down the outside width with the casing. So in case I need to know that. So I make sure I write them all down, and then I take note of the sill height, the header height, and then the interior height of the window opening. And so you can see I've done that for the entire house, and I had enough measurements here that I was able to get everything drawn. And so at the end of this tutorial, this is what we will end up with. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started drawing in the interior walls, and I'm going to start down in this bottom corner of the living room. I'm going to assume, because this main part of the house is one big rectangle, that the width of the living room is the same here as it is up here. Now, this is an older home, so that might not be the best assumption, but I'm going to go with it for right now. So I'm going to go back to my model, and I want to verify that this dimension here, which I drew from the image on the assessor's site, is actually the correct measurement, the 27 feet 2 3/4. If it's not, I'm going to have to adjust the drawing. So I'm going to click on my tape measure tool, click the interior edge of the left wall, drag across, and hover over the interior edge of the right wall. And you can see that it says 27 feet. So that means I am going to have to adjust the width of this large rectangle before I get started. So I'm going to hit Escape to exit my tape measure tool, click on my selection tool. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to click up here somewhere to the left of this wall. Like I said, I'm kind of starting in this corner and working my way out. So I'm going to shift everything over here to the right by 2 3/4 inches. And what that will do, since SketchUp is sticky, is it will stretch this connecting wall by the 2 3/4 inches. So I'm going to start, click, drag a box, and when I get to the other side, that bottom corner, I'm going to release. And now you can see that everything that was in that box, completely within that box, is selected and it's highlighted blue. Now, SketchUp works very similarly to AutoCAD, if you're familiar with AutoCAD, where if you draw from the left, everything that is completely contained within the selection box will be selected. And if you draw from the right, anything that's even partially in the selection box will be selected. So you can see in this case, when I draw from the right, it actually selects not only the edges, but also the face. When I drew from the left, even though it was over this whole big area, it did not select the face because the face was not completely within that selection box. That's okay. When we stretch the edges, it's going to stretch the face too. So now that those are selected, I'm going to click on my Move tool and come down. I'm going to click on this bottom right-hand point of this wall. You could really click on any of these points inside the selection or within the selection. I'm going to click, and then I'm dragging, and you can see as I'm dragging that red dotted line and the message pops up on red axis. This means that I am dragging perfectly in alignment with the red axis, which is what we want, because if we're not in alignment with either the red or the green axis, then we're not drawing at 90-degree angles anymore. We're not drawing an orthographic drawing. So unless you're specifically drawing an angled wall, you want to be snapped to either the red or the green axis. So as I drag to the right, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner the length is changing. So as I drag, I'm going to type in 2.75 inches and hit enter. And that will automatically move the wall exactly 2.75 inches. So if I go back and click my tape measure tool and check that measurement again, you can see now it is the correct measurement. And that is exactly what we want, so that we know we're starting from a good place to begin drawing in the rest of our walls. Now that we know our basic outline is as accurate as it's going to get for right now, I'm going to group these exterior walls. And the reason for making a group is that I don't want my interior walls to stick to my exterior walls. So I want to be able to edit them separately. Like I've mentioned before, SketchUp is sticky. So once you draw a face next to another face or a line next to another line, they stick to each other. So if you try to move one, they'll all move, or whatever is touching each other will move. And so I want to be able to edit the interior walls separately from the exterior walls and work with them separately, especially because I already know that this is fairly accurate. So I am just going to drag a box over all of those exterior walls, my entire drawing, right click somewhere on the drawing, and then select Make Group from the menu that pops up. And now you can see if I click on my drawing, there is a big blue box around everything, and all of the edges are highlighted blue. And even if I click on the face, it doesn't actually select the face. So now I know that everything is grouped. This is perfect. So now when I draw in my interior walls, they will not stick to my exterior walls. Okay, so the first wall I'm going to draw in is the one that establishes the depth of the living room. It's right about here. So if I look at my drawing, it is 12 foot 9 1/4 inches deep from here to here. And I'm going to start in this corner and kind of work my way out and up to the top. So I'm going to come back to the drawing, click on the tape measure tool, click on that interior edge of the bottom wall, drag up, and you can see that as I'm dragging, a guideline comes with the tape measure. And it is aligned to the green axis as I'm dragging. So I am going to just type in 12 foot 9.25 inches and hit enter. And that gives me a guideline that is exactly that measurement from the bottom edge that I clicked on. Then I know that that wall is 5.5 inches thick, so I'm going to click on that first guideline, drag up, and that will create a new guideline. Type 5.5 inches and hit enter. The reason I'm doing this is because I have noticed as I teach SketchUp that the biggest mistake students tend to make when drawing a floor plan is that their lines are not straight. And if you start drawing your floor plan in perspective view and don't use guidelines, it's very easy to draw lines that are ever so slightly off. And if you draw one line that isn't perfectly straight and keep building off that line, most of the lines will end up being crooked or not at 90-degree angles to each other. And since we're drawing an orthographic drawing, we're drawing the plan of a fairly regular house, we probably want most of our walls to be at 90-degree angles to each other, unless they're specifically angled or curved. So the reason that I have you start out in parallel projection mode when you're drawing is so to make sure that those lines are straight. So see, even if I take my pencil tool and I try to draw a line, it's very difficult in this mode to get a line that is just a little bit off. If you start to go off of the red axis or off of the green axis, it's pretty obvious. It wants to snap to one of those axes. If you're in perspective mode, that's not going to be the case. You actually have to take an extra step to make sure that they're snapped properly. Then I take one step further and use the guidelines so that I know that this line is perfectly aligned to this line. So I know that they are parallel to each other. And that way, when I start to draw on my wall, I don't have to worry about drawing it just a little bit off. And you'll see. So I'm going to click the rectangle tool, zoom in, and if I hover over the intersection of the guideline and that interior wall edge on the left, you'll see a little X comes up and the message intersection and group. And that means I'm making sure to click on the very intersection of those two lines. So I'm going to click, drag over to the right, look for the intersection on the bottom right, and click again. And there's my wall. And so it's perfectly straight, it's the exact right dimensions at the exact right spot, and I'm not guessing at all. I think a common misperception that most interiors designers have about SketchUp who aren't familiar with it is that SketchUp isn't accurate enough for them. The truth is, it's very accurate. It can be accurate to as many decimal places as you want. So, and if you are working with guidelines and you're working with exact measurements and not just guesstimating things, you will find that your drawings are completely accurate. So now that we've got that wall added in, if I go back to my measurements, there's a couple places I could go from here. This is the kitchen. I think what I want to do is draw in this back wall of the kitchen before I start drawing in these smaller walls that are kind of, this is a closet and this is a stairwell to the basement, and this is just a little wing wall that establishes the space for the range and the cabinets there. So I'm going to start with this wall up here, and I'm not going to walk you through drawing in all these walls because the point is not for you to actually create this plan yourself. The point is for you to take these techniques and use them to create your own plan. And so if I were you and I was just starting out learning this, I would draw my own home, whether it's an apartment or a house. I'd measure it, I'd sketch it out, and I would walk through all of these steps for a space that I can actually see and go back and verify the dimensions. So the next measurement is this wall. It is 13 feet 7¼ inches from this wall. So I'm going to repeat the process with my tape measure. Click, drag it up, 13 feet 7.25 inches. And then I'm just going to assume that that wall, I didn't actually measure it, I'm going to assume that it's also 5.5 inches. So I'm clicking on that guideline and typing in 5.5 inches as I drag up. And there is that wall. And then before I draw that wall in actually, I'm going to go back and see there's a wall here that is 10 foot 3 inches from this side wall. So I'm going to create a guideline that is 10 foot 3 inches over, and then assume that that's 5.5 inches thick. And you can see how I am starting to rough in those lines and for the walls. And if I go back now, this is actually, I think, 33.25 inches from this wall to the face of this wall. So I can go back in 33.25 inches. Oops, 0.25 inches. And this is how I use guidelines to kind of rough them in. So now I can use my rectangle tool, and I can, same as we did last time, kind of come over here, draw that wall, and then draw this wall. And then if it starts to get a little too crowded with guidelines and they're starting to confuse you, you can delete them one at a time using the eraser tool. Or if you want to delete all of the guidelines at once, you can go to Edit, Delete Guides, and it will clear all of the guides. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw in kind of the rest of the walls in this area, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about how to adjust the group for the exterior walls if we find that there is a discrepancy. Okay, so I've gone ahead and drawn in the walls that define the kitchen, the entryway closet, the stairwell to the basement, and this wall defines one side of the dining room, and this wall defines the other side of the dining room. You can see as I started sketching in the walls, they created these faces in between them. We don't want those right now, we just want the actual walls. We'll add these in later to represent the floor. To delete those, you can just click on them once and see the face is selected because it's got all those blue dots all over it, and just hit the delete key. Okay, so let's check the dimension from this wall to this wall, and then the dimension from this wall to this wall. So this dimension is 19 feet and 1/4 inches. So if I go back here and use my tape measure tool, 18 foot 4.5 inches. So I bet what happened here is that I put the wall thickness for the garage inside of the dimension when I was drawing it rather than on the outside. So we need to adjust this length so that it is correct. So I'm just going to click on this edge, draw a guideline over 19 feet, 4.5 inches, hit enter, and that is going to be the spot that we want this edge to be at. Now remember, we group these walls, so I can't just go ahead and move them. I need to open the group and edit the group. In order to do that, all I have to do is double click on the group, and you can see the lines that were not in that group are now grayed out, and there is a box around the group with a dotted line. So that's how you know you're editing a group. So I'm just going to use the same technique we used before. I'm going to draw a box from the left over everything that I want to move. I'm just going to zoom in, click my move tool, click this intersection right here and drag over, and you can see I'm snapped to the red axis because there is a red dotted line. I'm going to drag over until I reach that guideline. You can see it says online outside active, so that's how I know I'm at that point on the guideline, and click. And now let's just verify that measurement before we exit the group. 19 feet 4.5, perfect. So hit escape. Then to exit the group, you can just go back to the selection tool and click somewhere outside of the group. And that's it. Now, I think there's another change we have to make because I can see just from eyeballing it that these two walls aren't lined up. But another way to check that is to just use a guideline. If you click on an edge and then click on it again, it will establish a guideline that is lined up exactly with that edge. It's basically 0 inches from that edge. And so you can see that these two walls are not lined up. This is a header in real life, and so I know that these two walls line up with each other. I don't even have to verify the dimension, but I will. So if I check this dimension from here to here, it's 14 feet. And if I check it on my measurements, it should be 14 feet 2 1/4. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to delete this guideline because I want to move this wall down so that it lines up with this wall. So I'm going to establish a guideline that's lined up with that wall. See, that's perfect. And I think this is off by 2 inches. 2 1/4, exactly. So I need to move this down 2 1/4 inches. So I'm just going to double click to open my group so you can see it's open. I'm going to drag a box just around that wall. And I'm going to click the move tool, click this point, and drag it down until I get the intersection with that guideline. Hit escape, click outside the group, and now you can see those two walls are perfectly lined up, and my dimension is exactly as I recorded before, 14 feet 2 1/4 inches. So the purpose of me showing you that is so that you will know how to adjust your drawing for your plans as you're going forward. I can guarantee that there will always be some adjustments that you're going to have to make after you've drawn some walls in. And my favorite way to do it is just to establish a guideline where I want the wall to actually be, and then move the wall until it is snapped with that guideline. Then it's like I said before, I know it's perfectly straight and at right angles. I'm going to go ahead and finish drawing in the rest of these interior walls, and then when I come back I will show you how to clean up the wall intersections and make groups out of the interior walls. As you can see, I now have all of my interior walls drawn in exactly that same technique I showed you, using guidelines and rectangles. Now what's happened, if I zoom in, you can see there are breaks in all of the walls where the rectangles joined with one another. And so if you're working in SketchUp, one thing that's important to know is if you have a line that is intersected with another line, at that point the line breaks. And so this is not one long line, it is 3 small lines. And so to keep our model as simple as possible, what we want to go in and do is delete all of these little breaks in the walls, just to keep it simple. And it will speed things up later when we go to 3D. So you can use the eraser tool and just go around and click on all of those intersections that were created by the rectangles. And this is a pretty quick thing to do. But I'm not going to go ahead and do them all because that will take a little bit of time. I want to show you that you cannot erase the intersections between the exterior walls and the interior walls because of how we made that group. So see, if I click on that, well, actually it erased the group, it also erased the line. And so if you erase one of those lines, see, the face disappears. And in order to create a face, we need a closed loop. So for instance, for this wall group with this face, the closed loop starts here and it runs all the way around. And so if we delete that one little line, the face disappears and we no longer have a closed group. So that's why we can't delete the intersections between the exterior and the interior, because this line closes the group. It is not shared with this, it closes this group of interior walls. It's not shared with this exterior wall. Now, what we want to do after we get all of those lines cleaned up is we're going to create groups out of the interior walls. So all of the walls that are touching each other, we are going to create separate groups out of them. And the reason for doing this is, again, just to keep things simple. We want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for us to make modifications in the future. So the cleaner we keep our model, the easier our lives will be. Now, before I showed you a technique where you could just drag a selection box over a group of lines and faces and select all of them, there is another way to make your selections in SketchUp that is really wonderful. So if you click on an edge, you single click it, you get just that edge. If you click on an edge, if you double click it, you get that edge and any faces that are attached to that edge. So you can see when I double clicked on that edge, I got the edge and the face that was attached to that edge. If you triple click on an edge, you get not only that edge, but the face it's connected to and all other edges that are connected to that face. So you can easily select by triple clicking all of the things that are attached to one another. If I click once on the face, I just get the face. If I double click on the face, I get the face and all the attached edges. So there's two ways that you can do it. So now that I've got this entire section of walls selected, I'm just going to right click on it and make group. And now you can see this set of walls is grouped together, and actually if I had made a mistake with my measurements and wanted to move it, I could move the entire group at once without having to reselect it. That's the beauty of groups. You can see it's not sticking to this group or to anything else. Now, all I'm going to do is go ahead and triple click on this group, right click it, make group. And then I have one last little group here. This is a weird little chimney that's in one of our bedrooms. So I'll triple click it and make a group. And so now I have 3 distinct groups for my walls. And that's it. We have created now at this point the exterior shell, and we have drawn in all of our interior walls. And so our next step in the next tutorial will be to go back into our walls and add in all of the window and door openings. And after that's done, we'll be ready to move into 3 dimensions.